goosebumps sitting in the midst of all of you. Some of them are here to give moral support. Anyway, let's get on to business now. So before we start the conversation with Ambassador Raghavan, I'd like to give you all a brief background, which is the basis of our topic today. Do you know, and I'm sure you do, that 77 years ago, India awoke at the stroke of the midnight hour to an address by Jawaharlal Nehru. You know that? India awoke to find neighbors divided, friends turned enemies, and witnessed an exodus in full flow when towns were torn apart and families displaced. In the midst of the struggle were the icons. You must have heard of them, read about them, but I will still tell you who they are. Nehru, Gandhi, Netaji, Patel. But in the midst of these, there were many others. And today we have Mr. Raghavan here to focus on some of the many others who were very much a part of the freedom struggle, but were lesser known. It's a good opportunity for us all to get to know about those people as well, because they were just as involved in the freedom struggle as the icons we know of were. Sir, in the introduction of your book, you mention, and I quote, "Millions participated in the Indian national movement, and there were many representatives, even leaders, all well known in their time or location, but who became invisible in the dazzle of Gandhi, Nehru, Patel, and others who monopolize the soundtrack of India's struggle of freedom," unquote. This summarizes so well the tapestry woven by you of the 5 characters in your book. I'm sure our young audience here must be wondering and must be wanting to know eagerly who these famous 5 were. So, my first question to you is, who are these 5 personalities and what made you write a book about them?
So thank you very much. And first of all, thank you to the organizers of this festival for having invited me. And thank you very much, Mrs. Chugh, for having read my book carefully. And I'm greatly looking forward to a conversation today. Now, the 5 characters, let me mention who they are. The first is Sarojini Naidu. The second is a gentleman named Asaf Ali. The third is someone called Sayyid Hussain. The fourth is someone called Sayyid Mahmood. And the fifth is Aruna Asaf Ali, who was Asaf Ali's wife. So these are the 5 characters. And as Mrs. Chugh said, they are not that well known. It's not as if they are totally unknown, but unless you know a little bit about that time, you wouldn't have heard of most of them, except perhaps Sarojini Naidu. So that is one part of your question. Now, why did I write about them? You see, I wrote about them because I was interested in that period of Indian history, roughly the first half of the 20th century. Because as you all know, it's a contradictory period. It's a story, the first half of the 20th century is a story of great achievement, great sacrifice, which is the independence movement and the culmination of the Indian independence movement in our freedom, and which was the first major what we call decolonization in the world. So it's a very, very powerful and very moving story. But the second aspect of that period is it's also a great tragedy, Because what was one country divided into two, and it's a story of great polarization between two religious communities. So that is really what I wanted to write about. But I didn't want to write just something about that time. I wanted to write about people. And I was lucky, by chance, and it was purely by chance, I discovered that in the first 10 years, sometime around 1910, 1911, Sarojini Naidu was in London. And she was 32 years old. She was married, had 4 children, but was an established poet. And she had gone to London for medical treatment and spent about 2 years there, away from her family. Her husband was a well-known doctor in Hyderabad, but she was living with friends. And as I said, she was an established figure. She was already a well-known poet. She had been published in Europe, which was a big thing in those days. She knew everyone. While in London, she gathered around her this flock of 3 young men, Asif Ali, Sayyid Mahmood, and Sayyid Hussain. And they were in their early 20s, and she was 33, 34. So obviously they fell madly in love with her. They were totally infatuated. So I was interested. I thought, this is odd. You find this group. And I knew a little bit about Asif Ali, and I knew a little bit about the other. So I said, let me see what happens to this group over the next 40 years. What happens to their lives? What happens to their friendships? And what do they make of their lives? And I found that these 4 progressively became more and more involved in the freedom struggle. Although Sayyid Hussain Sayyid Hussain went back to India, became a journalist, and at one stage was in Allahabad bringing out a newspaper for Motilal Nehru. When he met Motilal Nehru's daughter, Swarup Nehru, and they fell in love and eloped. Now this alarmed, because here's a Muslim running away with a young Nehru princess. So this alarmed Motilal Nehru, and he summoned Mahatma Gandhi to his assistance, and both of them decided that Sayyid Hussain has to be banished. So Sayyid Hussain was sent off to the US, where he lived for the next 30 years till he came back to India around 1947. So he drops out of the story. But Sayyid Mahmood, Asif Ali, Sarojini Naidu, they are very much part of not a tightly knit group, but they're a close kind of group, and they're friends. And 1927, Asif Ali met Aruna Asif Ali by chance. By then he was 41, and she was this 19-year-old Bengali Brahmo girl, and they decided to get married. So in 1927, when a Hindu married a Muslim, it was a real conversation stopper, just like it is today, but perhaps even more. So that brought in the 5th character, and really my book is about these 5 people in the backdrop of the national movement. So I wanted to see how the freedom struggle, how the communal polarization, how the rise of separatism, and finally how partition impacted their friendship, impacted their lives, and actually changed all of them. So this is what the book is about.
Mr. Raghavan, at this point I'd like to ask you, how did the other 4 get involved in the freedom movement? How did they get initiated into the movement?
Well, Sarojini Naidu, even by 1911, 1912, she had been drawn towards public life in India. She was, even as a young woman, she was addressing public meetings. She was attending annual sessions of the Indian National Congress. To some extent, because of knowing her, that acted as a kind of facilitator for the young men to think about to think about public life, to think about life on a public stage. And my guess is, to some extent, it was their friendship with her or their infatuation with her that made them take the first step into public life. Then there were other factors. It was an age of nationalism. There was Jallianwala Bagh, there was the non-cooperation movement, there was the Khilafat movement. So that they were young people and they got involved in it. But I think, and each of them was successful in their own way. Sarojini Naidu was a well-known poet. Her husband had a flourishing medical practice in Hyderabad. She need not have gone to jail and become a freedom fighter. She could have been very much a high society lady and, done all the right things. Similarly, Asif Ali and Sayyid Mahmood were well-qualified barristers from England. They could have had a, very, very successful life as barristers or lawyers in the higher courts. And Sayyid Hussain could have been a well-known journalist. But the fact that they were in the midst of this great nationalist struggle, I think influenced each of them. And they made those different choices that I won't have a conventionally successful life, but I'll become a Congress worker, I'll go to jail, I'll take part in protests, I'll become a political figure. So I think that is how they found themselves embedded in the freedom struggle.
Mr. Raghavan, in one of your discussions, you have said that personal relations animate history, right? Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah? And these romantic twists and turns that you've written about in your book create a sense of interest, should I say, for a person like me who's not a history buff. And then you want to read on more, now what's coming. It's not all serious stuff. You have covered Hindu-Muslim relationships. There appears to be a cordiality in those relationships at that time. Am I right? Terms used in the present times were unheard of then. Am I right? Why do you think the divide has developed and the chasm becomes so wide now? It's a rather long question.
No, it's a difficult question. The fact is we are polarized today in religious terms. Has that polarization increased? A lot depends on who answers the question. Many people will say that, look, it's always been like this. After all, you had a partition in 1947. You had major communal situations in the 1920s and the 1930s and thereafter. So it's not a new thing. It's something which has always been there. In my own opinion, I think the polarization has impacted our personal and our social lives to a much greater extent than in the past. I think while polarization as a social phenomena, Hindu-Muslim antagonism as a political phenomena was there, but I think it's in our times it's seeped more into our day-to-day affairs. And perhaps it is the outcome of current day politics. Perhaps it is the outcome of, a long process of political change in that direction. It depends on, depends on your point of view. But I would say it's a great pity. You're quite right. I think even in the midst of the great polarization of the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, and it was a great polarization, there was a cordiality in personal relationships which we miss today. There were many more people then, Muslims who had Hindu friends and Hindus who had Muslim friends than we have today. We lead much more secluded lives. And more than anything else, I think there were many more people then who were prepared to stand up and say that, look, religious polarization is wrong. And whatever be the reasons for it, whatever is the rationale, that it is wrong in principle, I think that it was much more, there were many more people saying it then than they are today.
You're right. Tell me, how long did it take for you to delve into the archives and get out all these facts that you've written about in your book, which is close to about 400 pages?
Well, it took me, you see, I've studied history in my university, so I knew the period. I didn't have to, but it took about a year and a half or 2 years. I was lucky that I found so much in these five people's personal correspondence, in their diaries. Incidentally, You see, Sayyid Mahmood and Asif Ali, and along with many others, were locked up in jail together during the Quit India movement in 1942. The Congress Working Committee, which consisted of Mahatma Gandhi, and Mahatma Gandhi was locked up near Pune in the Aga Khan's palace. The rest of the Congress Working Committee was taken off to Ahmednagar. And they were locked up in a fortress in Ahmednagar, medieval Nizam Shahi fortress in Ahmednagar, for 3 years. So you had Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Patel, Maulana Azad, down to Asif Ali and Sayyid Mahmood, all cooped up together, nothing to do, totally cut off from the outside world, no newspapers, no news coming in from outside. So they had nothing to do except talk amongst themselves, fight amongst themselves, and write diaries. So I was lucky I could get hold of these diaries and their correspondence. So it took me about a year and a half or 2 years to put it together. The difficult part was not putting it together. The difficult part was finding, I had the good fortune of finding this group. And then I realized that they were interconnected and there was a paper trail which I could use because I was writing a history book, not a novel.
Can you elaborate on the relationships that germinated and those that were destroyed during the freedom movement?
Well, that's a very good question, because when we think of history, we always think of things which have happened. But history is also things which relations which got terminated prematurely. And one relationship, for instance, was that between Asif Ali and Jinnah. Asif Ali looked up to Jinnah. He was a successful lawyer. He was a man of the world. He was the one who who was very much at ease in high society. And the younger people around him, especially young Muslim men, they all looked up to him for advice, and he was like a kind of a role model. But from the late 1920s and early 1930s, you can see the drift in their personal relationships, because Jinnah is more and more then identified with separatism and the Pakistan movement, and Asif Ali and Sayyid Mahmood are part of the nationalist Muslims in the Congress. So you can see how their relationships change. Similarly, Asif Ali and Aruna Asif Ali. Asif Ali was 41. He married this 19-year-old Brahmo Bengali girl, and she came from a very good family. It was not as if she was a nobody. One of her father's brothers was married to Rabindranath Tagore's daughter. And he himself was a member of the Royal Commission on Agriculture. He was a professor of agriculture in the University of Calcutta. So it was a very well-established family. And when they got married, and they fell in love, and so they decided to get married. When they got married, there was no end of a fuss. The Muslims were upset, the Hindus were upset, everyone was upset. And people were principally upset at the Hindu-Muslim marriage, but other people said that, he was 42 and she's 19, it doesn't make sense. This is what Sarojini Naidu said, that, this age difference I don't like. But in any case, they had made up their minds and decided to go through with it. And from 1927 till about 1940, you see Aruna Asif Ali very much being a kind of she's being mentored by her husband. The husband, Asif Ali is 20 years older. He's telling her what to read. He's guiding her. And she's very much a conventional Congress leader's wife. That when the Congress goes on agitation, like other wives around the Congress leader's wife, she also goes to jail. She's a very dutiful Congress leader's wife. But in 42, it's like a switch is flipped. The Congress leadership is locked up, and Aruna Asif Ali says, I've had it with this conventional politics. And she goes underground. She joins up with far left groups, and she's totally impatient with this non-violence business of Mahatma Gandhi. And they think we have to put pressure on the British Empire, so they're uprooting train tracks, blowing up trains, setting off bombs. There's a price on her head. And along with all that, you can also see the relationship between her and Asif Ali changing, because Asif Ali is a lawyer, he's a constitutionalist, He's a very sober figure, while his wife has become this radical firebrand, and in the process acquired a new personality. I mean, someone who was totally infatuated and, in a sense, guided by her husband, now sees him as a, conservative, very sober, old-fashioned man, and she wants, things to move faster. And she acquires a new personality, and incidentally, she became an icon in her own right. And the Congress, although they disapproved of her, realized that she's a great rallying figure and she's a very popular figure, so there's no way they could, do anything about it.
So we've heard a lot about your book and realize your interest in history. As India's representative to Pakistan, can I ask you a question about that? Could you share some experiences? Some experiences. And one more question after that.
Ajay is also here. Ajay was my successor, but he was also the last High Commissioner and was expelled from Pakistan in 2019. So I mean, he will confirm that, and I served in Pakistan for 7 years in all. I was there in 2 stints. So you have lots of experiences, both good and not so good. My general impression is that, India and Pakistan deal with each other at 2 levels. One is the government to government level, and the second is the people to people. The people-to-people level has nothing to do with the government-to-government level, and the government-to-government level has nothing to do with the people-to-people level. They are 2 different planes of existence. So I have many experiences. I remember soon after I reached Pakistan the first time in 2003, I had gone to a place, I think it was to Takshashila or some place near Islamabad, and my wife was with me in a sari, and Pakistanis are totally infatuated by Indians. When they see Indians, because they've been brought up on this diet of Bollywood, so they're curious about India, they admire India in many ways, and they're endlessly fascinated by Indians. So I remember this little girl came up to my wife and said, "Auntie, aap India se hain?" She said, "Yes." And her second question was, "Auntie, aap Rajput hain?" So my wife said, "No." And this little girl says, "Hum to Rajput hain." So, in many ways, while the country has, gone on a totally different trajectory, in other ways, in a civilizational sense, it's also not changed. Many of the realities which we deal with are also there in Pakistan if you scratch and look below the surface. But you see, the other thing about Pakistan is that they've been brought up since they were children on a diet of Bollywood. So I remember in 2014, there was this famous dharna by Imran Khan, who's now in jail, and today there's another dharna, Ajay told me. But in 2014, he came into Islamabad with very large number of followers, and what was meant to be a one-day protest meeting, he came into the heart of Islamabad and camped over there, refused to move. He brought the city to a standstill. So much so that the president of China, who was supposed to visit, President Xi Jinping, couldn't visit. They had to call the visit off. So for the first and only time in history, the Chinese president came to India but did go to Pakistan because of Imran Khan. But when this dragged on for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, people are wondering, how does this guy attract so many followers to come and sit there? And this talk began that there are actually not more than 200-300 people. So I remember the TV channels in Islamabad, every morning they would begin with this question, and this is a dialogue from Sholay. Ki kitne aadmi the? So you have to see Pakistan constantly looking itself in an Indian mirror.
That's a very nice perspective of Pakistan that you've given to us. One more last question. You retired on the 31st of December 2015?
Yes.
Correct? Shortly before that, Prime Minister Modi paid a surprise visit to Pakistan to attend the Nawaz Sharif's granddaughter's wedding. Was it really a surprise for you too?
Well, it was and it wasn't a surprise. In the sense, Mr. Prime Minister Modi came there on the 25th of December. But in December of 2015, just about 2-3 weeks before that, the National Security Advisors had met in Bangkok. So the Indian National Security Advisor had met his Pakistani counterpart, and it was meant to be a secret meeting, but then both sides said that there's been this meeting and they have had they've made some good progress. Then a week later, Mrs. Sushma Swaraj came to Islam for a Heart of Asia meeting. So even then, people said that pieces are falling in place for something big to happen. Now, the fact that the Prime Minister would choose to come himself in an unannounced visit was a surprise. But that something was going to happen was not a surprise. So let me put it like that. And so yes, I think it was a very big step which he took. And because more than anything else, what he signaled to people was that he was putting his personal political capital. And while Nawaz Sharif understood that, unfortunately the Pakistanis the rest of Pakistan didn't understand it. And they missed a very, very big opportunity. I think to some extent they are paying the cost of missing that opportunity.
It was a novice's attempt.
No, not at all. Not at all. No, it was well thought out. You see, because you don't become Prime Minister of India to do small things. You want to do big things. So it was in the same spirit as Prime Minister Vajpayee going in the bus to Lahore, or Dr. Manmohan Singh trying with Musharraf. It wasn't a novice's attempt at all. It was quite carefully thought through.
Thank you so much for clearing that out. Coming to the end of our conversation, Mr. Raghavan, it's been very enlightening talking to you. And for me personally, it's been an honor to be part of the Fest. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions from audience? Anyone would like to ask something? Yes.
Raghavan, that was fascinating, absolutely. We could have gone on endlessly had there been more time. So you spoke about a couple of positive experiences and about the Pakistanis, looking at themselves and perhaps the rest of the world through the mirror of India. But was there anything negative on arrival that startled you or kind of made you think that the task ahead was going to be tough? Because there is also, apart from Bollywood, perhaps some kind of ingrained, inculcation that India is the enemy country, that everybody out there is conspiring against Pakistan. So did you feel that? Because your cousin, Ambassador T.C.A. sometimes mentioned that while he was in Pakistan, that little children would also come up with very negative ideas about India. Did you experience that?
I should introduce the person who asked the question. Ambassador Sujan Chinoy is Director General of the Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defence Studies. He's one of our great experts on China and has spent many years dealing with that country and is also here for the festival. So, very good question. Yes, there were many and multiple negative experiences. But my overall impression, as I said, is that at the popular level, there's no animosity at all, or very little animosity towards India. On the contrary, Pakistanis admire India, and they've been admiring India for a long time. Much before our economic success began, they used to admire India for its Supreme Court, for the Election Commission, for its regular elections, for the IITs. So they admire India's institutions. But there are many negative experiences. As you say, there's a certain brainwashing which takes place, and there is this identification of India as the enemy country. But frankly, it never bothered me too much because I think I've served in our neighborhood earlier also, and I find that this idea of there being a certain India is there in all our neighbors because you are so much bigger, it's bound to be there. What I did notice in Pakistan is that their government can be very, very pig-headed or bull-headed and act totally against their interests. I remember in 2014, with a lot of effort, because the politics in India was totally opposed to such a move. Dr. Jaishankar, the present External Affairs Minister, he was sent to Islamabad as part of a cricket, because all the SAARC countries were playing in the World Cup. So the Prime Minister had the idea that one way of breaking the ice with Pakistan is to send the Foreign Secretary there. And because we just couldn't do Pakistan, it was made out to be a SAARC-wide tour. But basically he was coming to Pakistan. And it was a very good visit and, it broke the ice. But his plane had barely taken off when we read that, or we heard that the fellows who were involved in the terrorist attack on Mumbai had been released on bail. And when we asked them, why are you doing this? They had no convincing answer. So the government acts, or people in the government act in a very, very short-sighted, anti-Indian way. And sometimes totally against their own interests. But I don't see it as a major factor. I mean, I see that if we have a slightly more clinical attitude, you can do business with Pakistan.
Any further questions? Okay. Yeah.
Hello, sir. I had done my Bachelor's of Technology in Civil Engineering from NIT Srinagar itself. And sir's question only gave me this idea to carry it forward. So, sir, my experience, obviously, I was before the abrogation of Article 370 and before Modi ji took over in a very sort of strong way on India. So, sir, when we interacted with the localites there, they were majorly divided into two factions. In fact, three factions. One who praised India, like you mentioned. The other who were really against India and they were with Pakistan. And the third one was obviously the Azad. We as students faced many challenges because we were looked down upon. There was always an intangible line between the Kashmiris. 50% for state. So the people also alien to that state, despite being the part of that state itself. So, though I much agree that there can be a positive part to it, as a government, I believe that people are also in that way only because we educated people also when we also face the same in that high level of schooling and technology. Then, what do you have to say about that, sir?
No, what you're saying is true. I don't think, Pakistan and India can become like US and Canada ever. It's not possible. There are too many issues. But the point is that they are your neighbors. You have no option. It's going to continue to be there. You can't wish it away. So you have to deal with them as they are. You can't deal with them as you would like them to be. You have to take it as it is. And a certain amount of anti-Indianism is to be expected. You see, it's like us with China. I mean, let me give you one example. We still haven't forgotten 1962. It happened so many years ago. So similarly, the Pakistanis will never forget 1971. Because they, in many ways, they feel even more humiliated than we did in 1970, than we did in 1962. Secondly, since in the last 20-25 years, the two countries, the level of development in the two countries has changed a lot. We have done very well. They have gone backwards. So that has added that feeling of jealousy and angst. So those factors will not go away. But as I said, you have to deal with them as they are and try to, improve things to the extent possible.
Sir, what is your opinion on POK? Can we ever visit POK?
Can you ever visit POK? Definitely you can. But if you think you can visit, are we going to take back POK? No, we are not. Whatever I tell you, we are not going to take it back. It's not going to happen. It may happen in some very, very distant future, but in the foreseeable, reasonable future, it's not going to happen. So I think there's no point believing in one's own propaganda. But can you visit? Yes, you can. I'm sure that will happen.
I would like to visit part of India, not part of Pakistan.
No, you can visit and think this is part of India. Even if it is not, even if you legally. So you can visit and say, I'm visiting India, but if you think, can we take it back? No, you can't.
Then one has to go with a Pakistani visa to go to.
Not necessarily. You see, till a few years ago, Pakistanis were coming to Srinagar and Indians were going to Muzaffarabad. They were not going on visas. So countries, when they want, they can find a way out. You have to want.
Sir, I express my gratitude to you, sir. But I would like to know that your journey, the journey of your book is the journey of our freedom struggle, and the famous, famous five. Who were they? Who dreamt of a democratic India, or democracy in India? How India learned democracy during freedom struggle? Please.
Well, it's a very good question. I mean, why was the freedom struggle democratic? It could have taken other avenues. You could have had an armed struggle. I think the freedom struggle was democratic because its original founders, and this is not in the last century, but in the 19th century, in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, they thought of an independent India as being democratic. And because they thought like that, they thought that the kind of movement we should have should also be democratic. So the Indian National Congress, when it started, was very much, it was upper class, it was not representative, but it was democratic. So I think those original founding figures had a major role to play in why the national movement continued to have a democratic tradition.
The influence of Mahatma Gandhi?
Well, I think the influence of Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Patel was certainly there. But they were also the inheritors of something which had happened before them. So I think that earlier process is also very important.
I'm talking about Anna as a film. For me, she is the leader of beauty movement when everyone is playing. So, do you think that her role is underestimated in the Indian history?
I don't think it's underestimated because, even at that time, when she went underground, someone showed Asif Ali this newspaper clipping that children were being named after Aruna Afzal. Aruna became a very fashionable name because of her role of going underground. And then, she lived on for a long time. She died only in the 1990s. And she was a very well-known, popular figure. So I don't think her role is underestimated. But the issue was that more and more people believed that, a violent way, a violent path will not get you success in dealing with an colonial empire like the British. So I think, this view that you could achieve freedom in a democratic framework through a violent path had very few takers. There were some, who were the extremists, the bomb throwers, but they were in a small minority. It was never a very popular stream within the freedom struggle as a whole.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, esteemed guest. Your discussion on such a topic, which is very really, I could say, means what to speak and what not to is really, it needs a lot of guts to speak on this topic. And the way they have questioned right now, and whatever you told to us about this topic, really, it was very much great knowledge for us. Thank you for being here. And I am certain that our audience is leaving with the wealth of thought-provoking ideas and perspectives shared by our respected guests today. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.